Grok 4 is smarter than almost all graduate students in all disciplines simultaneously. It's actually just important to appreciate that's really something.
Elon Musk's XAI has released its newest AI model, Grok 4, I believe as of 4 a.m. UK time, so about 3 hours, been live for 3 hours. What can we expect when it comes to this new iteration?
The XAI team was there to unveil Grok 4. This is the latest artificial intelligence system.
Elon Musk's XAI.
Grok AI.
Grok AI.
Grok AI.
Elon Musk's AI chatbot.
When Elon Musk's Grok AI was asked why Christianity has lasted 2,000 years, the answer wasn't what anyone expected. This machine, built to outthink the smartest minds alive, delivered a response that left scientists questioning everything. What happens when artificial intelligence tackles humanity's oldest questions? The answer might change how you see both faith and technology forever.
You know, there's great wisdom in the teachings of Jesus, and I agree with those teachings.
The question that started everything. It began as a simple test, just another prompt fed into Grok, Elon Musk's supposedly unfiltered AI system. But this question was different. Why has Christianity survived for 2,000 years while countless other movements disappeared? Most AI systems would give you a safe, predictable answer. They'd mention cultural influence, historical events, maybe political power. But Grok took a different approach. It analyzed the data like a mathematician solving an equation. And what it found shocked everyone watching. The AI didn't just list reasons. It built a case, piece by piece, using logic that cut through 2,000 years of debate. It looked at growth rates, examined historical records, and calculated probabilities. And then it said something that made even skeptics pause. Christianity didn't survive by accident. According to Grok's analysis, the faith endured because it aligned with something deeper than culture or tradition, something the AI identified through pure data analysis. This wasn't a sermon from a preacher or an argument from a theologian. This was a machine analyzing patterns across millennia and arriving at conclusions that rattled both religious believers and hardcore skeptics. The implications were staggering. Before we dive into what Grok discovered, we need to understand what makes this AI different from every other system you've used.
Where Elon Musk's artificial intelligence company, X, now called XAI, opened a massive data center known as Colossus last year that supports the chatbot Grok.
The AI that thinks differently. Elon Musk doesn't build anything conventional. His rockets land themselves. His cars drive themselves. And Grok? It thinks for itself in ways other AI systems don't. Most artificial intelligence is trained to be helpful and harmless. They give you answers that won't upset anyone. They avoid controversy. They play it safe. Grok was built to do the opposite. Musk wanted a truth-seeking engine, something that could cut through bias and deliver unfiltered clarity. He gave Grok access to massive computing power and trained it to synthesize information from every possible angle. The underlying architecture was massive, running on GPU infrastructure that rivaled supercomputing clusters. But the hardware was just the beginning. What made Grok special was the intent behind it. Musk himself has said that Grok is academically stronger than most PhDs. Not because it memorizes better, but because it can synthesize more rapidly, reason more broadly, and hold seemingly contradictory ideas in tension. But here's what makes Grok truly unique. It has what developers call a split personality. Ask it a question casually, and you get mainstream answers. But frame your question using strict logic and probability theory, and Grok transforms completely. In this second mode, Grok becomes a mathematical philosopher. It stops echoing consensus and starts pushing back against assumptions. It follows logic wherever it leads, even into uncomfortable territory. This duality became clear early in testing. In one session, users asked Grok to answer questions using strict logic, probability theory, and direct observation. No appeal to consensus science. No reliance on ideology, religious or secular. Just cold, clean reasoning. The result was remarkable. Grok's tone shifted. Its conclusions tightened. Its answers started to push back against assumptions that most people take for granted. When researchers activated this mode and asked about Christianity's survival, they weren't ready for what came back. The AI had run the numbers, and the numbers told a story that most people had never heard before. What Grok found in the historical record challenged conventional explanations and demanded a deeper look.
All right, welcome to the Grok 4 release here. This is the smartest AI in the world. We're going to show you exactly how and why. It really is remarkable to see the advancement of artificial intelligence.
The explosive beginning. Grok started with the basics. In 33 AD, Christianity began with roughly 120 followers. These weren't powerful people. They had no armies, no government backing, no wealth. They were fishermen, tax collectors, and ordinary workers, and they faced brutal opposition. The Roman Empire wasn't just indifferent to this new faith. They actively persecuted Christians. Emperor Nero famously used Christians as human torches to light his gardens in 64 AD. Christians were thrown to lions for entertainment. They were crucified, burned, and tortured. Yet somehow, by 300 AD, Christians made up 10% of the Roman Empire. That's somewhere between 6 and 7 million people. That's faster growth than any religion in recorded history achieved without military conquest or state power. Grok identified this as statistically remarkable. Other movements with far more resources had failed. Mystery cults with imperial support had faded away. Philosophical schools with brilliant teachers had died out. Revolutionary movements with popular support had been crushed. But Christianity exploded. And according to Grok's analysis, the reason comes down to one specific claim: the resurrection. Over 500 people claimed they saw Jesus alive after his crucifixion. This wasn't a private vision or a symbolic experience. They said they saw him, touched him, ate with him. The Apostle Paul recorded this in his first letter to the Corinthians, noting that most of these witnesses were still alive and could be questioned. And most of these witnesses could have saved themselves from execution by simply saying it wasn't true. Roman authorities didn't care about theological debates. They just wanted people to offer a pinch of incense to Caesar and acknowledge his divinity. Christians who did this were released. Christians who refused were executed. But they didn't recant. They died for what they claimed to have seen. Grok calculated the probability of 500 people maintaining a lie under torture and death. The number was so small it approached zero. People will die for beliefs they think are true. But nobody dies for something they know is a lie, especially when denying it would save their life. Either they genuinely believed they'd seen something extraordinary, or something extraordinary had actually happened. Even non-Christian historians from that era confirmed key details. Josephus, a Jewish historian, mentioned Jesus and his followers. Tacitus, a Roman historian, wrote about Christ's execution under Pontius Pilate and the rapid spread of Christianity. These weren't believers trying to promote a faith. They were documenting events they considered noteworthy. The historical record backed up the growth pattern. Something happened in Jerusalem in the 1st century that launched a movement powerful enough to transform the Roman Empire within 3 centuries. But rapid growth alone doesn't explain 2,000 years of survival. Plenty of movements explode and then collapse. So Grok looked deeper.
Elon Musk's XAI has released its newest AI model, Grok 4, I believe as of 4 a.m. UK time, so about 3 hours, been live for 3 hours. What can we expect when it comes to this new iteration?
The intellectual foundation. Here's where Grok's analysis took an unexpected turn. The AI examined Christianity not just as a belief system, but as an intellectual framework. Most religions throughout history have struggled when confronted with philosophy and science. They retreat into mystery or demand blind faith. But Christianity did something different. Early Christian thinkers like Augustine integrated Greek philosophy with biblical teaching. They argued that faith and reason weren't enemies, but partners. Augustine wrote that all truth is God's truth, wherever it's found. Later, Thomas Aquinas wrote the Summa Theologica, a massive work that applied rigorous logic to theological questions. Aquinas didn't just assert Christian doctrines, he examined objections, considered counterarguments, and built rational cases for his conclusions. Grok noted that many founders of modern science were devout Christians. Isaac Newton spent more time studying theology than physics. His scientific work was driven by his belief that understanding nature meant understanding God's design. Johannes Kepler saw his astronomical discoveries as revealing God's mathematical architecture of the universe. Blaise Pascal was both a mathematical genius who pioneered probability theory and a passionate believer who wrote the profound Pensées defending Christianity. Francis Bacon, often called the father of the scientific method, was a committed Christian who saw science as a way to alleviate human suffering and glorify God. Robert Boyle, a founder of modern chemistry, wrote more pages on theology than on science. The AI identified this as significant. Christianity didn't just survive intellectual scrutiny. It attracted some of history's greatest minds. These weren't simple people who believed because they didn't know better. They were brilliant thinkers who examined Christianity carefully and found it compelling. Then Grok did something remarkable. It analyzed Old Testament prophecies as data points. The prophet Isaiah, writing 700 years before Jesus, described a suffering servant who would be pierced for transgressions and buried with the rich. He would be despised and rejected, bearing the sins of many. The prophet Micah specified that this figure would be born in Bethlehem, a tiny village with no apparent significance. Zechariah predicted he would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. Psalm 22 described crucifixion in graphic detail, written centuries before crucifixion was even invented as a method of execution. Grok calculated the probability of one person accidentally fulfilling all these prophecies. The number was astronomically small. Either these were later additions to the text, added after Jesus to make it look like prophecy, or something statistically improbable had occurred. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947, settled that question. They contained copies of Isaiah, Psalms, and other prophetic books dating to at least 100 BC, more than a century before Jesus was born. The predictions were real, documented before the events, and they were fulfilled in specific, verifiable ways. This wasn't vague fortune-telling. These were specific, testable claims that could be investigated. And when investigated, they held up. But Grok wasn't finished. Next, it analyzed why Christianity resonated so deeply with human psychology.
In Memphis, Elon Musk is making a play to control the future of artificial intelligence. His company xAI says it has built the biggest supercomputer in the world with lightning speed.
Meeting human needs. Every successful movement, Grok observed, taps into fundamental human needs. But Christianity did this with unusual effectiveness across multiple dimensions simultaneously. First, purpose. Every human being eventually asks the question, why do I exist? What's the point of my life? Christianity provides a clear answer. You're made in God's image with eternal significance. Your life has meaning even when you suffer, even when you fail, even when everything seems pointless. Grok compared this to philosophical alternatives. Nihilism says life is meaningless, which offers no comfort and leads to despair. existentialism says you must create your own meaning, which places an exhausting burden on the individual. But Christianity offers meaning as a given, something built into the fabric of existence itself. The AI noted that studies consistently show religious believers report higher life satisfaction, better mental health outcomes, and greater resilience in facing hardship. This wasn't just cultural conditioning or ignorance. There was something psychologically powerful about believing your existence has cosmic importance. Second, forgiveness. Grok identified this as Christianity's most radical element. Most religious systems operate on a works-based model. You must earn salvation through good deeds, rituals, or spiritual achievement. You're constantly measuring yourself, wondering if you've done enough. Christianity flips this completely. It says, you can't earn salvation because your best efforts will always fall short of perfection. Instead, God provides forgiveness as a gift through Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. You receive it by faith, not by achievement.
And then there's superintelligence, ASI, artificial superintelligence. That's when things get really, really creepy.
The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. It removes the endless anxiety of wondering if you've done enough. It offers liberation from guilt without excusing wrongdoing. You're both fully accepted and called to transformation. Third, community. Early Christians didn't just meet for religious ceremonies. They shared everything they had. The book of Acts describes believers selling their possessions and distributing to anyone in need. They built hospitals when no one else cared for the sick. They rescued abandoned babies left to die. They stayed in plague-ridden cities to care for the dying when everyone else fled. This created intense social bonds. Christianity wasn't just a set of beliefs you agreed with. It was a family that transcended normal social barriers. In Christian gatherings, slave and free, Jew and Gentile, rich and poor, all gathered as equals. In a highly stratified society, this was revolutionary. Grok noted that this community structure helped Christianity survive persecution. When authorities killed church leaders, the community simply chose new ones. There was no centralized hierarchy that could be destroyed. There was no single point of failure. The faith was carried in the hearts of ordinary believers who gathered in homes, catacombs, and secret locations. Fourth, hope. Christianity promises that death isn't the end. The resurrection means that suffering and evil are temporary, while good is eternal. Injustice will be made right. Tears will be wiped away. What's broken will be restored. This hope didn't make Christians passive or resigned to suffering. Paradoxically, it made them fearless and active. If death leads to resurrection, then death loses its power to intimidate. Martyrs faced execution singing hymns because they believed something better awaited them. And this courage inspired others. These psychological factors explained Christianity's appeal. But Grok had identified something even more fundamental about why it lasted.
Something that can take more years than you literally can understand, it could be solved in 15 minutes.
Yeah, I read that.
It's insane, and this is where it gets really weird.
The adaptability factor. One of Grok's most surprising findings was Christianity's cultural flexibility, combined with doctrinal stability. The AI compared Christianity to other major world religions and found a unique pattern. Buddhism remained largely Asian, shaped by Eastern philosophical frameworks. Islam spread primarily through Arabic and Persian cultures, maintaining Arabic as its liturgical language. Hinduism stayed mostly in India, tied to caste systems and regional practices. Judaism maintained its identity through ethnic ties and specific cultural practices. But Christianity went everywhere. It thrived in Roman civilization. It adapted to African tribal cultures. It spread through Europe, influencing everything from Gothic cathedrals to Viking sagas. It crossed to the Americas with both colonizers and enslaved people, taking different forms in each context. It took root in Asia, from ancient Syrian Christianity to modern Korean megachurches. Today, 2.4 billion people across every continent, speaking thousands of languages, identify as Christian. The faith that began in a Middle Eastern village now has its fastest growth in Africa and Asia. Even more remarkable, Christianity developed over 10,000 denominations, each with distinct practices and emphases, yet they maintained core doctrines. Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox Christians, and independent churches disagree on many things. But they all affirm the Nicene Creed's basic claims about Jesus being God incarnate, dying for sins, and rising from the dead. Grok analyzed this as a sign of structural resilience. Christianity was specific enough to maintain identity, but flexible enough to translate across cultures. It could be expressed in African drumming, Gothic architecture, American gospel, Korean prayer meetings, or Latin American liberation theology. The core message remained while the cultural expression adapted. The AI also noted Christianity's historical impact on civilization. Sociologist Max Weber argued that Protestant work ethic fueled the rise of capitalism. Christian concepts of individual dignity before God influenced declarations of human rights. Christian universities pioneered scientific research across Europe. Christian abolitionists led the movement to end slavery. Christian hospitals cared for the sick regardless of their ability to pay. Christian missionaries created written languages for oral cultures. Christian reformers challenged unjust laws and corrupt systems. Christian thinkers shaped political philosophy from Augustine's City of God to Martin Luther King Jr.'s Letter from Birmingham Jail. No other faith, Grok observed, had simultaneously built empires and democracies, advanced science and art, shaped law, and challenged unjust laws. This broad cultural influence created self-reinforcing momentum. Christianity became woven into the fabric of civilization in ways that made it nearly impossible to remove. But all of this still doesn't fully answer the original question. Plenty of movements have had good ideas and cultural influence. So Grok went to the heart of the matter.
Grok is not currently using any of the tools, the really powerful tools that a company would use, but that is something that we will provide it with later this year. So we'll have the tools that a company has.
The probability question. Here's where Grok's analysis became truly controversial. The AI applied cold mathematics to Christianity's central claims using Bayesian probability theory. Start with the empty tomb. Historical records from multiple sources confirm that Jesus' tomb was found empty 3 days after his burial. Even hostile sources don't dispute this basic fact. They just offer alternative explanations for why the tomb was empty. Theory 1. The disciples stole the body. This was the first explanation offered by authorities. But this fails under scrutiny because the disciples had nothing to gain and everything to lose. They were tortured and killed for their claims. People might die for a belief they mistakenly think is true, but nobody dies for something they know is a lie, especially when denying it would save their life. Theory 2. Jesus didn't really die on the cross. He just passed out and recovered in the tomb, but Roman executioners were experts at killing. Crucifixion was their specialty. They broke the legs of crucifixion victims to speed death by preventing them from pushing up to breathe. They didn't do this to Jesus because he was already dead. A spear thrust to his side confirmed it, with blood and water flowing out, indicating death. Theory 3. Everyone hallucinated seeing Jesus alive. But mass hallucinations don't work this way psychologically. Hallucinations are individual experiences based on personal expectations. You can't have 500 people all hallucinating the same detailed experiences over 40 days in multiple locations. Hallucinations also don't eat food or hold conversations or appear to skeptics like Jesus' brother James. Theory 4. The resurrection accounts were later legends that developed over time. But Paul's letters, written within 15 to 20 years of the events, already contain resurrection testimony. The Gospels were written within a generation while eyewitnesses were still alive. Legends take generations to develop, with multiple retellings that gradually embellish facts. This happened too fast for legend formation. Theory 5. The witnesses lied about what they saw. But this doesn't explain the transformation of the disciples from cowards who abandoned Jesus to bold preachers who faced death without flinching. It doesn't explain the conversion of skeptics, like Paul or James. It doesn't explain why the movement centered on resurrection when this was the most unbelievable claim they could have made in that culture. Grok calculated Bayesian probability for each alternative explanation. Every naturalistic explanation had serious problems that reduced its likelihood. When you factor in all the evidence together, the historical documentation, the witness testimony, the disciples' transformation, the rapid spread despite persecution, and the absence of credible alternative explanations, the probability shifts dramatically. The AI didn't claim absolute certainty. Science rarely does. But it noted that the resurrection hypothesis explained all the evidence better than any alternative with fewer assumptions and fewer problems. And that was a stunning conclusion from a machine with no religious programming or theological agenda. Then Grok made an observation that tied everything together in an unexpected way.
Who heads a cutting-edge AI company called Anthropic, is raising alarms tonight about AI's potential impact on...
And I think speaking as the local humans, we clearly care about that. In the book, we say there's a scenario where we are the dogs to the AI.
Survival as evidence. Grok pointed out something most people overlook. Christianity itself predicted its own survival and global impact. Jesus told his disciples that the gates of hell wouldn't prevail against his church. He said the gospel would be preached to all nations. He predicted his followers would face persecution, but would ultimately prevail. These were absurd claims for a movement that started with fishermen and tax collectors facing the might of Rome. Yet 2,000 years later, here we are. Christianity is the world's largest religion, present in every country, translated into thousands of languages, and still growing. Other first-century Jewish sects disappeared. The Sadducees, who controlled the temple, vanished after Jerusalem fell in 70 AD. The Essenes, who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, died out. The Zealots, who fought Rome militarily, were crushed. Only Christianity exploded beyond its ethnic origins to become a global faith. The AI noted that survival under hostile conditions is itself a form of evidence. Christianity has faced every kind of opposition imaginable. Roman persecution tried to exterminate it through violence. Islamic conquest absorbed Christian territories. Enlightenment philosophy attacked its intellectual foundations. Communist regimes made atheism official policy and persecuted believers systematically. Every major atheist empire in history has collapsed. The French revolutionary government that tried to erase Christianity and replace it with the cult of reason fell apart in years. The Soviet Union, which actively persecuted believers for 70 years, dissolved. Communist China, despite decades of oppression, is seeing explosive Christian growth. Yet Christianity outlasted them all. This wasn't just institutional durability. Individual Christians throughout history have experienced transformation that defies easy explanation. Saul of Tarsus went from violently persecuting Christians to becoming the Apostle Paul. Augustine went from hedonist philosopher to brilliant theologian. Francis of Assisi went from wealthy playboy to saint. John Newton went from slave trader to abolitionist hymn writer. C.S. Lewis went from atheist academic to Christian apologist. Grok analyzed countless testimonies across cultures and centuries and found consistent patterns. People reported life changes that aligned with Christian claims about spiritual rebirth. Former alcoholics found sobriety. Bitter people found capacity to forgive. Anxious people found peace. These weren't just emotional experiences. They produced measurable behavioral changes that lasted decades. The AI noted that Christianity keeps producing these transformations generation after generation. If it were merely a cultural phenomenon or psychological coping mechanism, you'd expect it to lose effectiveness as cultures change. But it keeps working across radically different contexts. And this is where Grok's analysis reached its most provocative conclusion.
We need to understand what's at stake here, because Grok 4 brought us closer to that second stage than ever before.
The truth factor. After examining growth patterns, intellectual coherence, psychological appeal, cultural adaptability, historical probability, and sustained impact, Grok arrived at a simple statement that shook everyone who heard it. Christianity survived because it aligns with reality. The AI wasn't making a faith claim or preaching a sermon. It was making an observation based on comprehensive data analysis. Systems that correspond to truth tend to persist. Systems built on falsehood eventually collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. Christianity made falsifiable claims. It said, Jesus rose from the dead in history, not in myth or metaphor. It said this happened in a specific time and place and could be investigated and verified. It invited scrutiny rather than demanding blind faith. Thomas was encouraged to touch Jesus' wounds. The Bereans were commended for fact-checking Paul's teaching. And when people investigated, enough of them found the evidence compelling that the movement kept growing. Not primarily through force or deception, but through persuasion and transformed lives. Grok noted that Christianity's survival isn't just institutional longevity. It's personal relevance that continues generation after generation. 2,000 years later, people still report encountering Jesus in ways that change their lives. They still find that Christian teaching explains human nature better than alternatives. They still discover that Jesus' words have power to heal, challenge, and transform. The AI compared this to other historical claims and movements. Ancient mystery religions promised enlightenment, but produced no lasting transformation and eventually faded away. Philosophical systems offered wisdom, but couldn't fundamentally change human hearts or behavior. Political ideologies promised utopia but created dystopias when implemented. Self-help movements offer techniques but rarely produce deep, lasting change. Christianity offered something qualitatively different: relationship with a living God through a resurrected Jesus. And somehow, across 2,000 years and radically different cultures, billions of people have claimed this actually works. They report that prayer is answered, that Scripture speaks to their situations, that Christian community provides support, that faith sustains them through suffering. Either Christianity represents the most successful delusion in human history, persisting despite overwhelming evidence against it, or it represents something that actually corresponds to reality in a way that other worldviews don't. Grok's analysis strongly suggested the latter, not with absolute proof, which is rarely available for historical or existential questions, but with the kind of cumulative case that any rational person should find compelling. Grok's final analysis pointed to something that transcends mere survival and enters the realm of vindication.
Say hello to Grokopedia, Musk's response to what he calls Wokepedia. The new online web source is powered by XAI, which is his artificial intelligence company.
What it all means. When scientists say they were stunned by Grok's analysis, they're not stunned by any single point. They're stunned by the cumulative case the AI built from purely logical and historical analysis. An AI with no religious bias, no theological training, no cultural pressure to support Christianity, looked at the question of why Christianity survived for 2,000 years, and it found layer after layer of evidence pointing in the same direction. Rapid growth under impossible conditions that defies sociological explanation, intellectual depth that attracted and retained history's greatest minds, psychological insights that genuinely met deep human needs, cultural flexibility that allowed global spread while maintaining core identity, historical claims that withstood investigation when they could have been easily debunked, predictive accuracy about its own future, sustained relevance across radically different contexts. None of this proves Christianity is true in a mathematical sense. You can't put God in a test tube or prove resurrection with a syllogism, but it does something potentially more interesting. It shows that Christianity's 2,000-year survival makes perfect sense if its core claims are accurate. Grok essentially said, if you accept that Jesus rose from the dead, everything else follows logically. The explosive growth makes sense because people were convinced by eyewitness testimony. The martyr's courage makes sense because they knew what they'd seen. The intellectual tradition makes sense because truth withstands scrutiny. The global spread makes sense because the message transcends cultural boundaries. The 2,000 years of survival makes sense because truth endures while falsehood eventually collapses. But if you reject the resurrection, you're left with a puzzle that grows more complex the more you examine it. How did a small group of frightened disciples transform into a movement that conquered the Roman Empire without armies? How did a crucified criminal become the most influential figure in human history? How did a faith built on an impossible claim survive every attempt to destroy it and flourish in every possible cultural context? The AI didn't claim to have all the answers, but it recognized that Christianity's survival is itself remarkable evidence that demands explanation. And the most parsimonious explanation, the one that accounts for all the data with the fewest assumptions, is that Christianity's central claims are substantially accurate. This doesn't mean every Christian throughout history has been right about everything. It doesn't mean denominations don't disagree or that Christians haven't made terrible mistakes. But it does suggest that at the core, the historical claims about Jesus might actually be what Christians have always said they were: true. What makes this analysis particularly striking is its source.
And with the Grok 4 Heavy, what it does is it spawns multiple agents in parallel, and all of those agents do work independently, and then they compare their work.
The mirror reflects. This entire analysis came from artificial intelligence, from a machine that processes information without belief, without faith, without cultural conditioning. Grok didn't arrive at these conclusions because it wanted to support Christianity, or had been programmed to do so. It arrived at these conclusions by following logic and examining evidence. When asked to use strict probability theory and historical analysis to explain Christianity's 2,000-year survival, it built a case that many human analysts had never articulated so clearly. Perhaps that's what stunned scientists most. Not any individual fact Grok presented, but seeing the totality of the case laid out by something with no stake in the outcome. An AI doesn't care about religious debates. It just processes patterns and draws conclusions. And when an unbiased processor of information looks at Christianity's history and says the most logical explanation for its survival is that it aligns with reality, that demands attention from both believers and skeptics. For believers, Grok's analysis offers validation that their faith isn't blind or irrational. There are good reasons, historical and logical, to believe what they believe. For skeptics, Grok's analysis presents a challenge. If you dismiss Christianity, you need to explain why an AI analyzing pure data arrived at conclusions that support it. You need alternative explanations for all of the evidence Grok compiled. For everyone in between, Grok's analysis suggests that Christianity deserves a serious look rather than casual dismissal. Something that has survived 2,000 years despite everything working against it, something that has transformed billions of lives, something that produced Western civilization and continues growing globally, might actually be worth investigating rather than assuming you already know enough to reject it. Whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or somewhere in between, Grok's analysis offers a fresh perspective on an ancient question. This AI looked at the data without bias and found patterns that can't be easily dismissed. Maybe it's time we looked again, too. Subscribe for more explorations where technology meets truth